We're live? Okay, don't see anything. Hi everyone. So I'm going to present today a presentation in Israel Path to Success. We're going to talk a bit about Israel, about the history, and in the end of it, a bit about cannabis. I will just share the presentation and let's see. Okay, presentation. Okay, so I'm going to leave some Q&A in the end and talk really about the following: Israeli cannabis history, where the Israeli program came from, and the Israeli medical cannabis program changed dramatically 2 years ago. I will compare the old program compared to the new one. Keys for success. What is objectively the points that brought Israel to be a powerhouse in the field of cannabis, and cannabis and medical vaporization when we get to that point as well. So we'll start with history, ancient history. Some researchers in Israel found traces of cannabis substance in one of the south shrines in Israel. And we're talking about the 8th centuries. And apparently cannabis was used in this area at that time as well. But a bit more of closer history. So everyone knows, I believe, in this field, Rafael Meshulam. He isolated the THC and the CBD compounds in '63 in the Hebrew University. I think one of the main things, if we're looking at cannabis in Israel, and the evolution of the research started at that point. The interest and the success of the Hebrew University working with cannabis was one of the triggers for generation after. So this research brought quite a lot of grants and even US funds for research to the Hebrew University. And that's what really one of the milestones. In the 80s still, Meshulam and the Hebrew University started to put together trials, even clinical trials. One of the most interesting clinical trial in the 80s was in epilepsy already. As we all know, it took another 30 years until epilepsy was actually started to be treated with cannabis. In the same time, some preclinical studies on anxiety, nausea, sleep, diabetes, multiple sclerosis, all of them happened already in the 80s in Israel. In '82, one of the key successes of Meshulam with his team as well was the anandamide, finding the natural cannabinoids in the human body and how they interact with the endocannabinoid system. This is one of the most cited articles that was put out, academic research that was put out in that time. And I will urge everyone to try and see the documentary The Scientist. You can find this on YouTube for free today about Rafael Meshulam and his history. The Israeli program starting almost in that time, in '93, first patient receiving medical cannabis license, probably the first federally program in the world for cannabis. And in 2008, structure where cannabis producers are getting licensed to cultivate is starting. You're probably asking yourself what happened between '93 and 2008, where patients can get cannabis, but there's no cultivation. So funny enough, these patients were getting cannabis from the police. and quite interesting story. 2012, Israel establishing the Israeli Medical Cannabis Unit, from the understanding that cannabis is different than other products, different than other agriculture products, and definitely different than drugs. And this basically unit is the one that is managing all licenses, both for patients and for LPs and cultivators and research licenses as well. Everything is bundled together under the IMCU. In 2016, the government is starting a reform. I will talk about this in a few minutes, how the old regulation for cannabis looked in Israel and how the new one is. 17, decriminalization of cannabis. Israel, those who don't know, is the highest consumption country in the world for cannabis. Almost 24% of adults tried the cannabis. And that brings the government to decide on decriminalization. And what we see in 17 is that the financial market is open for cannabis companies as well. We have the first cannabis company listed in 17. The new program is launched on 19. And in 2020, the stock exchange launching a cannabis index, the Tel Aviv Cannabis Index. Today we have 16 cannabis companies listed on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange. So what was the difference between the old and the new cannabis regulation in Israel? And this is something that I will talk about a bit when I'm looking on the key for success of the Israeli program. The old program was vertically integrated. You had 8 licensed producers that received license to cultivate, manufacture, store, do the delivery, dispensing, and even patient care. When I received my personal medical cannabis license in 2012, all of the patient care, the treatment, how to use cannabis, and what strain even of cannabis was all coming from the licensed producers. They were both the physicians and manufacturers. Obviously, we can see a challenge in the structure, and the regulators saw this as well. And as a result, in 2016, a new regulation were put in place. It was actually implemented in 2019. So it started in 2019, only 2 years ago. The new separation of the structure is based on the classic GAP, GMP manufacturing standard. Cultivation was the first piece of this puzzle. Manufacturing GMP, separate licensed, GDP for storage, and pharmacies that have license to be a pharmacy. Additional licenses were granted for secured delivery, GSP. Patient care was moved to the physicians in clinics, and license for labs, testing labs, to test with cannabis. One of the unique decisions around this new structure is that each of the license will be held by a different entity, so a different company. So no one company was holding all these licenses together. A few other changes that happened when the government moved from the old regulation to the new regulation, and these are changes that we see happening in other markets as well. Old regulation, the recommendation was given by a physician, but the license for the patient was produced by the government, by the cannabis unit. The cannabis unit would then issue and took the time to check. It's basically a type of control on the amount of patients and the work of physicians as well, limiting the number and controlling it. All of the medicines or the strains, I would say, were based on strains. So because the cultivators were the ones that drive the product development, everything was based on single strains, all products. The price was fixed, so it wasn't covered by the Israeli health insurance, but it was fixed to an exact amount that was equal to around $110. Now, this amount was like a subscription payment. It doesn't matter what was the amount that a patient would receive, he would pay always this $110 as a monthly fee. And the average amount until today of patients in the Israeli program is around 40 grams a month. The last one was no importation or export of cannabis in the old program. New program, there's a few interesting things that happen. The first one is the focus on the treatment methodology. Israel today has the Green Book. It's a type of Israeli pharmacopoeia for cannabis. And that's the direction for physicians how to prescribe cannabis. What type of cannabis to what indication, what's the right ratio, and what is the treatment? How do you do titration? When are you adding higher doses, and how do you change these different combinations of CBD and THC? The physicians now, if they are approved and passed a course from the Ministry of Health, they can prescribe cannabis. Once they're doing this, a patient will receive a license and prescriptions for a full year. So he doesn't need to go to another visit in the year. He has 12 prescriptions for once a month and a license, a topic that is now in the media as a discussion in the UK. How do you protect patients from walking around with cannabis, from consuming cannabis and not getting into trouble with the law and the police? The focus have changed from being focused on strains to cannabinoid profiles. So suddenly the discussion was how much THC, how much CBD, what's the ratio between THC and CBD, and what's the cannabinoid profile instead of strains. This has obviously created quite a lot of challenge and complaints from physicians and mainly patients. The price became a price per gram, so between $5 to $7 a gram. And that's another point that was actually much more comfortable for patients in the old regulation. And that's the price became 2 to 4 times more expensive, still under a cost of black market cannabis in Israel, but starting to be closer to a black market price. And I think these 2 points of the loss of strains in the and what happened with the price, that all prices became much more expensive, are the 2 points that a lot of patients were complaining on the new regulation, although the new regulation brought the program probably 10 years ahead when we're talking about the actual treatments. Now, the main reason that we saw this price jump is exactly what we saw in the slide before. The minute that you're moving from a fully vertical to separate companies in the supply chain, obviously each company trying to maximize their own revenue. And that's what happened when we're talking about unregulated prices. Import and theoretically export was approved in Israel. There's no export, almost no export out of Israel, because the market right now is growing in a speed that most of the companies are actually importing and prefer to sell locally their products. Looking a bit on the key success for the Israeli cannabis. I would say that the first point is the first mover advantage on research of cannabis. As I mentioned, Rafael Meshulam, the start of cannabis research in Israel was in the 60s. a lot of the US-based research was based on Israel initial research in the 60s. There's a wonderful story how the NIH came to Efel Mishulam's lab and to collect the first isolated THC in order to start doing research in the US. And today in Israel, all of the public universities have cannabis research programs running. There's 7 cannabis courses in colleges and universities in Israel, and there's even one BA degree in cannabis. Another key for success is how the government succeeded to push research as the first thing, or the first line, beyond commercialization of cannabis and export and cultivation. The main focus of the Israeli cannabis program was how do we really leverage the backbone of research that Israel has. So if we look at clinical trials today in the Israeli program, there's 4 optional research licenses for companies. Like Cannibal, for example, has today 4 research licenses from the company, from the government. There's research license for developing medical cannabis products, devices, preclinical research, clinical research, and agricultural development for strains, mainly, and development of unique hybrid type of cannabis sativa. There's almost 300 cannabis studies running in Israel currently. And as I mentioned before, 12 universities with active cannabis research programs. I have to admit that even receiving a research license is a fairly comfortable and short process. A company can put a research protocol and have the research approved in 3 to 4 months. That's quite fast in cannabis in the world. On top of it, the government decided to put grants and government support, active support for the industry. And so we're talking about the state-regulated cannabis program that started officially in 2005. Grants for cannabis startups from the Ministry of Science. The Ministry of Agriculture founded 43 cannabis research, new strains and better ways to cultivate cannabis. And the government established a national center for cannabis research under the Ministry of Agriculture. And on top of it, very new, technological incubator is a national program in one of the south cities of Israel. And this program is getting funds and support from the government. If it's easier process for licensing, if it's matching of funds. In general, Israel have quite robust program for startups. So startup can get sometimes coverage of 30 to 40% of all expenses for R&D. And all these programs, except cannabis, is a type of startup technology. Some call it a Cannatech. And so that's definitely helped a lot of young companies. And what happens as a result is that we see a lot of leading companies, and I mentioned only 3 of them here, decided to open their research centers in Israel, establishing research center for cannabis in Israel, and doing it usually in partnerships, or if it's Kronos by itself, and to really leverage on the know-how in Israel and the support. One of the biggest research labs, the research lab of Dedi Meiri, is established in Israel under the Technion with 50 PhDs working on several research programs. And one of the, I would say, more successful research that is running now in Israel is cannabis for children with autism or on the autism spectrum. And what we see from initial data is almost 80% of the children in this program show some level of improvement. And these are kids that did not show these improvement under conventional drug therapies for autism. The last part for me and the key for success of the Israeli cannabis is the governmental education and the post-marketing surveillance. So what the government did with this green book, and this is a picture from the green book itself. It's something that you can find today in English on the web. And through this Israeli Canacopedia, so it's a pharmacopedia for cannabis, beyond just really building the right treatment, the, the government used the data that we have from years of experience and treating patients. So type of a mass past post-marketing surveillance, collecting the data of the different strains and what strains are working on what indications or what the demand of patients. And then taking these strains and taking out the different ratios of cannabinoids. What's the level of THC and CBD in these strains and the connection to a specific indication and illness. And came out with this table. It's a longer table that you can see here, but that's a part of this table, and really showing when are you starting the treatment and what illness you will start with T10 and C2, for example, recommended for pain and chronic pain. And when are you moving from T10 and C2 as a physician to higher THC strains, if it's a T15 or T20. The numbers are the percentage in the active ingredients. So you see the percentage in the end of the day that you have in this in the strain itself. So that's really what the background of Israel as a cannabis superpower, I would say, or research superpower. And going to talk a bit about cannabis and how cannabis came to life through this program in Israel cannabis. So the idea behind cannabis is how do we take this technology of vaporization, medicalizing it, and bringing a medical way to consume cannabis, but still via inhalation. And one of the reasons that we're sticking to inhalation compared to many other delivery method is that when you're looking at cannabis patients today, majority are choosing still today to inhale their cannabis. And the reason the patients are choosing to inhale cannabis is the fast onset. When a patient has indications as pain, management, psychiatric indications, fast onset is a key. Consuming cannabis orally is usually something that will take an hour, sometimes 2 hours until we see the effect or the peak time. High bioavailability, inhalation, we see bioavailability of 30%, sometimes 40%, while oral consumption will be anything between 6 to 10%. So we're talking about a product that is 4 or 5 times more effective when you're consuming it through inhalation. And certainty, probably one of the key reasons patients are choosing to smoke cannabis, getting the same effect every time compared to something that is really depend on your digestive system and the situation of your stomach at a certain point. Physicians, on the other hand, are looking for, I think the picture we see here on the left, pills, capsules, tablets, something that is extremely measurable. And that's key for physicians. How do you get something that is very measurable? Something that is consistent. Any drug and even any consumer product usually is the same every time we're buying it. On the other hand, when we're looking at cannabis and flower, this is an agricultural product, and it's actually different every time that the patient receives this. And safety, having a medical device or a medical production standards for the medicine. And that's the anomaly we have in cannabis, in the medical cannabis program. We see in the medical program that we have on one hand physicians that are promoting oral consumption of cannabis, but oral consumption of cannabis is unpredictable. Depends on your acidic in the stomach, depends on the individual. And on the other hand, you see patients choosing again and again smoking. Smoking is inconsistent, and we know the risks of tar and other constituents that you have while consuming it to the lungs. So that's a situation that the medical cannabis market in Europe, in England, in Israel is suffering from. One product that is measurable and unpredictable, and another one that is unmeasurable but effective. And this is the disturbing image as physicians are seeing right now. It's saying that majority of cannabis patients are consuming their medicine via inhalation, in smoking. And between 70 to 80%, this is across the board, if it's Israel, if it's Germany, and even the UK, a program that started in the beginning with cannabis tinctures for kids with epilepsy. And the idea of the program in the beginning is not for inhalation, but actually oil consumption through tinctures. And this is one of the challenges that the industry has, difficulty for many physicians to prescribe cannabis that is being burned and inhaled. At Cannabis, what we're trying to do today is creating a device that will close this gap, build a bridge above this gap, I would say. For physicians, they will receive a medical device, CE mark approved, in a precise dose. Every inhalation gives you 1 milligram of active ingredients. But on top of it, the device mimics all the benefits that patients are looking for as they consume the flower today. So the fast onset is still there, the high bioavailability, but this time with very high accuracy and receiving the same product every time when it's produced and delivered to the patient. One of the things that was key for us is to check devices and to see how we can bring the product to be exactly 1 milligram every time. And in the beginning, we saw that one of the issues is voltage. And this is a regular vape pen that you have in the market. Even without any material inside, every activation, the voltage is dropping, and then the amount that is being produced by the device is dropping. So the vape pod needed to be very, very stable. And so we lost some of the lifetime, but we got a very, very stable activation. Then we were looking on the different products, if what type of extract you're putting inside. Are you using diluents? Are you using carriers? Cannabis decided that we're not using any carriers because of the different variation and the risk factors. Therefore, today the cannabis products have pure cannabis extract and cannabis terpenes as well. So no added e-liquids carriers. And we got to a place where we have a very stable activation of 15% differentiation. In addition, we're going to launch very soon the medical cannabis product in the UK. It will be for pain management, will be around 80% THC as the first product in the market for vaporization. The cannabis products for CBD were launched already in the UK market and in Germany, and in the next couple of months will be much more accessible around different channels in UK and Germany as well. The CBD products obviously have no THC and the same pure process of no carriers, just hemp extract with different variation of CBD and other cannabinoids. But we saw in the when we're looking on customer profile and what customers are actually looking for, the main use for the products are for stress and anxiety, better sleep, and pain management. But another very interesting segment that's coming just behind these three is smoking cessation. So that means that we see more and more patients that are approaching and looking, and users in the CBD, it's not only patients, replacing their nicotine devices with CBD devices. The potential of the market and the vaping market in Europe, if we're talking the medical market in Europe, that is estimated to be around 2 billion euros. What we see is that usually in the United States, any state will see between 25 to 33% of vaporization of extracts. And so if we're assuming that the same numbers will be in a medical market, we're talking about the addressable market of 500 million euros in Europe and UK as well. And that's something that is quite interesting, quite lucrative. The main reason is that vaporization is basically the only method that we see that's succeeding to move patients that consuming cannabis today and smoking to non-smoking methods. So one of the things in this lucrative market is first mover advantage. Having a medical device is being able to sell in this market, high barrier to entry to get into this market because of the medical certification that is needed. And I would like to add one more thing before the. So one of the things that Cannabis did in the process of research based on a lot of the Israeli experience and research and development is really a preclinical study focused on insomnia and sleep disorder. What we did is we took 150 different types of formulations and looked on 3 key cannabinoids, CBD, THC, and CBN, and built different ratios, including adding terpenes in a later stage. And the things that we found that were very interesting is first of all the entourage effect. We all know about the entourage effect, but this was very interesting to see how a small amount of THC boosts the duration of sleep time. A small amount of terpenes were very effective as well. So the research really looked into the quality of sleep and the length of sleep. And on top of our main product that does have THC and is a medical product that has almost 100% longer duration of sleep time, you can see it here, I think. Here you can see the 100% longer duration of sleep time. One of the other thing that was very interesting is the OTC product that has only CBN and CBD. So in the UK, it's still regulated, but in the rest of Europe, CBN is not controlled substance, and that means that this is a OTC product that performed almost the same as as um, medicine, pharmaceutical medicine. And yeah, I will jump into the sections of Q&A. And I don't know if you can ask Q&As or you can write them, but I can see what you're writing. And I can't hear you. Okay, so question. Do you think that Brexit might put the UK at an advantage of medical cannabis? Well, that's really a political question, governmental question, and really to see how the government will decide. If government will decide to take this opportunity, and definitely there is a huge opportunity here. Theoretically, UK is not attached anymore to the requirements of regulation from the EU. So EU is suddenly have its own regulation, and the UK can build their own regulation around medical cannabis. So there is definitely an opportunity here, and will the decision makers take the right decision to move forward with that? That's something that is really a guess for everyone. I believe that there are initiatives in the NHS to look into cannabis, to push forward on research as well and validation, and hopefully that's something that we will see. What stage is device? When do you hope it will be available to patients? Really in the upcoming months. And the product is developed, the production line is ready, and Cannabis announced the distribution, the first distribution with Life, with the medical cannabis clinics. And so we really believe that in the next few months, the first product will be available for patients in the UK. Okay, from your experience, is there a potential for one cannabinoid that we're not tapping into? Yeah, definitely. There's much more than one cannabinoid with potential. I think that today the research and the medical institute knows really well only THC and CBD. Maybe we know a bit about 2-3 other cannabinoids like CBN, like CBC, and like CBG. But here, everything stops. The amount of clinical and even preclinical research that we have on other minor cannabinoids is almost non-existent. So there's a huge potential. And in the US, there's a trend around Delta 8. It's a cannabinoid that is a derivative of CBD, but have some level of psychoactive effect. And there are interesting indications on the medicinal effect of this cannabinoid. I don't think that the CBG and CBC were researched enough, mainly in a higher dose. We did our study around the CBN and insomnia and sleep disorder, and I'm sure that this cannabinoid has many others, many other effects. And again, there's other cannabinoids that because they're in a very small amount, there's not a lot of research around them at this point. So I think that's one of the challenges that we see. Any other questions we have? Okay. I don't see any other questions. So yeah, thank you very much. And oh, one more. How to notify similar products. What do you mean by notify similar products? Maybe you can explain. Yeah, vaping products. But what do you mean by notify? So I think there's, if you're asking about other products for vaporization of cannabis, in a medical world today, the only medical device vaporizer that is out there is Storz and Bickel. It's a big device, the Volcano, and the smaller one, Mighty. They're mainly for flowers. There's no medical device based on extract today. On the side of CBD, there's many others. And basically in the EU, there's a problem using it as a medical device. No, so the vape pod will be a medical device, similar to the Mighty and Volcano. They're already approved as medical devices. So there are vaporizers that are medical devices. I think in Canada, there's 2 other devices that were approved as medical device. So it's something that is already happening. The vape pod was approved as a medical device in Israel and is going to take part in a clinical trials with patients in one of the main hospitals in Israel. And is there a device fitting with the ceramic or aluminum? So ceramic core. And our device is based on a C-cell technology, the ceramic core technology. And that's the main method to work there. I think the uniqueness of the vape pod is in the cartridge. The cartridges are coming sealed. So that means that you have a sealed cartridge where the material is being injected in a GMP facility. So it's a sterile, nothing is entering the cartridge. The cartridge cannot be tamper-proofed and open. On top of it, the device is very simple. There's no playing with the temperature, but rather cartridges are coming already dialed in with the temperature. So each cartridge has its own temperature, and once you're putting it inside the device, it's already fitting the inside. Okay. Thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed.